From a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, tips on maintaining that sexy fall look when you've got OCD. And now, the podcast host who keeps his mind and body focused on the wheel and that fast food chicken sandwich, Pete Dominic!
That's right, I am starting to feel like you've got a camera watching me at all times, Pico. Thank you very much for another hilarious and irreverent introduction to today's episode of the podcast, which welcomes the great, the brilliant Dave Rothkopf of the Rothkopf Group of Deep State Radio, of the Daily Beast, formerly of Foreign Policy, one of the most well-connected and intelligent, well-spoken guys in all of policy and politics, I think, in my opinion at least. Another great conversation with Dave. I mean, David Rothkopf. Only his mother calls him Dave, but I continue to call him Dave. I don't know. I can't call someone David. What, am I dating him? You know what I mean? It seems like you use someone's full name when you've met their mother, David or Peter or Michael. I just feel weird about it, so I call him Dave. Dave Rothkopf joins me. I had hoped to get a second guest today, but things didn't work out because I had a lot going on, including my first visit to the dentist for a checkup in 2 years. Well, almost 3 years, actually. The last time I visited him, he reminded me I'd just lost my job. I think that brought me back to a dark place because I spent much of the afternoon kind of sulking around, feeling a little dark and gray and couldn't quite put my finger on it. But man, that was a tough time. I still have the remnants. I still worry, obviously, of not being able to do what I love to be able to support my family and make a living, which is this podcast. So thank you very much for listening today. For those of you who subscribe, I can't thank you anymore. If you haven't signed up, standupwithpete.com. I certainly don't want to go back to the dark place, the suck, as I called it when I was in it. You might be in it right now for any number of reasons, whatever it is. I hope you get out. I hope you have resources. If you don't have resources, reach out. Ask somebody, what do you do when you are feeling this way or feeling that way? What do you do when? Ask that question. Hopefully you've got some friends, maybe a few, maybe plenty. I have gained so many new really good friends through hosting this podcast over the past 3 years. I mean, I got to know a lot of people who listen to the old show pretty well over the years. And by the way, one of them was Mark Nolte, who is out in Iowa. He is a very talented musician, economic development guy. I mean, Mark basically has his hands in a number of things, can do about anything. Almost ran for governor, thought about it for a long time, of Iowa, and a really well-respected guy there in Iowa City. And as a tribute to the great Peter Coyote, he and his band, he wrote a tune with his band, City Park, in Peter Coyote's honor, and you can listen to the song at the website cityparktheband.com. Their new EP goes live at the end of the month on Spotify, and I always want to promote my friends and listeners here on the show and their work, including Dr. Barry Hummel and his podcast, Pops on Hops, Matty Carlson and his band Harbor Coat, and the Stick-Arounds, his own record label, Phonophore Records. You've got Gareth Sever, of course, of Buckets and Boards. So many talented folks who listen and contribute in any number of ways to this show. And so Mark Nolte writes this song for Peter Coyote, and so of course I sent it to Peter. I reached out to him, and he and I are going to tape a conversation on Wednesday. I cannot wait to talk to Peter Coyote, and then I will air that or post that probably on Friday or over the weekend as a weekend special. I'm not sure. It's just going to be on its own. I want to post it with no preamble, no news clips or anything, because he's always such a great guest and a great friend just to do the show. So the great Peter Coyote joins me. Thank you to Mark Nolte for writing that song, and I'll share that at the Hangout or before, whenever Mark gives me permission. But definitely when I speak with Peter Coyote, we'll get his reaction in real time. How about it? Lots to be grateful for me, and so much of it has to do with you. I guess that's what I'm trying to say here at the top. Oh, and yeah, I got a good bill of health from the dentist after he grated my teeth with a metal hook. I mean, they scraped so hard with a metal hook on your teeth. How is that okay? How do they not just drive a deep groove into your tooth? All kinds of crap is coming out. It was a horrible experience. I mean, the dentist, who does that job? Got a lot of respect for those people. I think there's a lot of challenges for their emotional and mental health in that job. So I greatly appreciate Andrew Basta. He's a great dentist. and also a very thoughtful guy. And you know what he told me? He told me that there's an orthodontist who takes him to lunch like once a month to get customers, to get patients. That was hilarious. He's like, you don't have to take me. This is my impression of my dentist. You don't have to take me to lunch. I mean, I'll still send you patients. Okay, folks. Well, I'm in the city today doing a show for Climate Week with a cool organization called Save the Humans. SaveTheHumans.org. Excited to see listener Sandman, I know, is going to be joining me. Stand-up comedy during the day. I'll let you know how it goes tomorrow. Joining the show tomorrow, Wajahat Ali. Looks like I'll be talking to radio host and author Tom Hartman. Journalist and writer David Daly is going to join me this week, as is Dr. Peter Hotez, and more I am sure that I haven't booked yet. Hopefully, Christian and Ophir. Lots more coming up. It's only Tuesday as I am talking here on episode 684. Well, yesterday was the Queen's funeral. I didn't watch it, not a second of it. I didn't turn the TV on. Some people actually got up early to watch it. Hey, whatever. I mean, I can understand why people are curious about it and why it's entertaining. But yeah, Queen Elizabeth was finally buried after a historic state funeral production that I guess went off pretty smoothly, and credit to all the security forces for all those world leaders being there in England. Hurricane Fiona has just absolutely clobbered Puerto Rico, where most of the country is still American territory, I should say, has still suffered power outages. 2 people have died at least after the hurricane swamped the island and places with up to 30 inches of rain, causing life-threatening flash flooding. And nobody really seems to be paying attention in American media because the Queen died. And Governor Ron DeSantis is shipping people around for political purposes. And Donald Trump has gone full QAnon at a rally over the weekend. Just a couple of clips for you. Here first is a sheriff now in Texas announcing that he's opened up a criminal investigation into 2 flights chartered by the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, that took dozens of migrants from San Antonio to Martha's Vineyard. Last Wednesday, 48 people, mainly from Venezuela, were taken to the island on the planes. They claimed they'd been promised jobs in the area. Ron DeSantis has defended the move, while critics have theorized a crime or crimes might have been committed. Now, here is this Texas sheriff, Bexar County Sheriff Javier Salazar. Of course, he's got to be a Democrat, but he told reporters at a press conference Monday his agency is officially opening up an investigation. Here's just a quick clip from that.
We are opening up a case with an investigation with regard to the suspected activities involving the 48 migrants from Venezuela that, as we understand it at this point, the facts of the case at this point, are that on Wednesday, September 14th, here in Bexar County in the city of San Antonio, our understanding is that a Venezuelan migrant was paid what we would call a bird dog fee to recruit approximately 50 migrants from the area around a migrant resource center on San Pedro here in San Antonio. As we understand it, 48 migrants were lured, I will use the word lured, under false pretenses into staying at a hotel for a couple of days. They were taken by airplane. At a certain point, they were shuttled to an airplane where they were flown to Florida and then eventually flown to Martha's Vineyard, again, under false pretenses is the information that we have, that they were promised work. They were promised the solution to several of their problems. They were taken to Martha's Vineyard from what we can gather for little more than a photo op, video op, and then they were unceremoniously stranded in Martha's Vineyard.
There you go. That's that Texas County Sheriff Javier Salazar. We'll see what happens with that. The other that's getting a lot of conversation still continuously on media that I've noticed is this Trump rally over the weekend, which I still haven't watched and refuse to watch, but apparently is really crazy. Ben Collins over at NBC News does the best job, a great job covering the conspiracy theorists and QAnon folks that make up so much of Trump's following. Here he is yesterday with Nicole Wallace on Deadline White House.
People are wondering when it's going to happen, when the big next January 6th thing is going to happen. And we have this rolling wave of violence in this country by people who are obsessed with bringing back the previous time, and that can mean whatever they want. It can mean the 90s, it can mean the 50s, it can mean something much further back than that. But they think they are losing control of the culture, of their own power in society. And Donald Trump is giving them a way to get it back. So is QAnon, by the way. But that guy who shot his family, killed his wife, killed his dog, injured one of his daughters, his other daughter, went onto Reddit before news reports even came out about this. She went onto a thing called QAnon casualties. It's where people go when their family members have been consumed by QAnon. Not necessarily violent, stuff yet, but they are worried about their family members. And she said, QAnon did this to my dad. QAnon made him do this stuff. He was already a little, he had a screw loose beforehand, but this turned it into a full-on, violent movement for him. And for Donald Trump to lean into this literally days after that, right? For Donald Trump to say, push out a "where we go, one we go all" QAnon pinned tweet, or excuse me, truth, which is what he calls it. He can't tweet. He knows what this is. This is a guy who's losing control of the idea that he can be democratically elected again, but he still has an army, and he's afraid of being indicted. So put two and two together here.
Yeah, really well said. Very good stuff from Ben Collins over at NBC News. And let's have it over to Fox real quick. Listen to Tucker Carlson. I just like 5 seconds. This is going to enrage you, but it's important. This is the most watched television show in all of cable news. Here's like 15 seconds of Tucker Carlson talking about his version or his framing of January 6th.
In reality, virtually all of these cases are about January 6th, which was a nonviolent election justice protest and covered, of course, by the Constitution of the United States, excluding the people who committed vandalism. But you have a right to assemble if you want.
What? I mean, we have eyes and ears, and we've seen the videos over and over and over again. People, hundreds and hundreds of people have been arrested for that violence, not vandalism, violence. They killed cops. I mean, a woman was killed. It's just important, I guess, to know that that's what Tucker Carlson thinks. Do you know anybody that thinks that way about January 6th? If you do, send them my way. I'd love to try to talk some sense into them, or at least hear what they have to say. I don't know anybody that thinks that about January 6th. If you do, I honestly would love to talk with them off the air. And if they wanted to allow me to record it, I would, but I'd be real interested in it. Okay. Because I can't believe that people would believe that line from Tucker or anybody else, call them tourists, etc., and so on. All right, just a couple clips for you. And like I said, didn't get a lot as much I wanted to get done on the podcast today, but I'm very happy to have this conversation with Dave Rothkopf coming up. Also, after this, I grabbed a clip from my favorite podcast, 10% Happier. I mean, this, of course, is my favorite podcast because I host it and produce it and edit and book it every single day. And I love doing it. I love talking about these issues and learning about them. But one of the favorite ones I love to listen to is Dan Harris, 10% Happier, where he talks all about just kind of dealing with life and anxiety and depression and regular suffering. He uses this kind of very modern Buddhist frame of reference that he is living and talks a lot about meditation. There's a whole app, everything. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend it. And I have a 5-minute or so clip that I grabbed from that podcast that helped me so much that I just wanted to share it. So first, though, my conversation with Dave Rothkopf. But before that, I want to make sure that I remind you that Indeed.com is a great company if you run your own business, because every single hire counts, and no hiring partner understands that like Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. So don't spend your hours and hours on multiple job sites just looking around for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Huh? How about that? It's all there on Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. And if you hate waiting, and I hate waiting, ooh, do I hate it. Indeed's U.S. data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Indeed does all the hard work for you. So sponsor a job and boom, Instant Match shows you candidates whose resumes on Indeed fit your job description immediately after you post. With Instant Match, you can start hiring fast. And in this minute that I'm talking to you, 16 hires were made on Indeed according to their data. And when you sponsor Indeed and Indeed post in the U.S., you're 3 times more likely to get a hire. The right candidate is doing everything they can to find you. And if you use Indeed, you can be sure you're doing everything you can to find them too. Indeed knows that when you're doing everything for your company, you can't afford to overspend on hiring. So visit Indeed.com/standup to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/standup. Indeed.com/standup. Terms and conditions do apply. The cost per application pricing not available for everyone. You need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, there it is. And don't forget to sign up for Stand Up with Pete Street Team. Go now. standupwithpete@gmail.com if you want to help us out and get a paid subscription, please. Okay, my first and only guest today is one of my favorite people to talk to read. I love him on Twitter, where he is prolific and always making these brilliant threads. I talked about his latest pieces at the Daily Beast, where he is a contributor and columnist on Putin and Russia. We talked about Iran. We talked about parenting. We always have a little bit, or we've been more having these kind of more personal conversations, which are always great. He's got a new book coming out, American Resistance, the inside story of how the deep state saved the nation. He's on Twitter at DJ Rothkopf. You can listen to his show, which is so good, so smart. He always has a great panel of guests on Deep State Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Dave Rothkopf. I mean, David. There he is, Dave Rothkopf. I guess he hasn't gotten anything done today because he's just been watching the Queen's funeral. Is that right? You just been watching it?
Yeah, I watched some of it. I started watching it, and then the network coverage was so fatuous and irritating that I stopped. And then I would watch little bits that appeared on Twitter, where people highlights. And I thought, I'm pretty cool. I'm tough. I see this as a social phenomenon or political event. And then they showed the picture of the corgis and her horse, and I just lost it.
That's what got you.
It got to me.
I'm still stuck on that. You think you were tough because you were watching the Queen's funeral. You're saying
I'm tough all the time.
Oh,
I'm tough. I was tough yesterday when I watched, Trey Lance break his leg on national television.
Oh, is that a football thing?
Yeah.
Oh no. Oh, I hate that. And then did they replay it over and over?
Over and over.
Oh God, that's terrible. Well, first of all, I mean, the criticism of the network coverage is it's wall to wall funeral, and an American territory, Puerto Rico, has been lights out.
Yeah, no, there's no power in Puerto Rico. It is a territory. We should be, we're the richest and most powerful nation in the world. There's a hurricane there, every year or two. We should prepare for it and take care of them, just like we should in our cities. And we don't, every year, it's like every year, oh, there are wildfires streaming across California. And it's like, how often does this have to happen before you do something about it?
Yeah. Well, we remember what happened last time when Puerto Rico, when it was a much worse storm. I mean, this is apparently absolutely horrific, but I guess the human cost hasn't been the same. And
the infrastructure a lot of it didn't recover.
Ever.
And of course, back then, we had an idiot for president who didn't like brown people and wanted to trade Puerto Rico for Greenland, according to a recent book.
He wanted to trade it?
Yes. Apparently.
Is that a thing? You're a foreign policy guy and a history guy. Can you do people is land or countries?
Well, I guess it happens, and in history, and Manhattan Island was bought for $24 worth of beads, and we purchased Alaska at one point. So countries do buy and sell their assets, I guess. But the notion that somehow Denmark wanted Greenland, Denmark wanted Puerto Rico, and that we would like Greenland, or that he thought that was somehow a good deal.
We'll give you Puerto Rico, you give us Greenland. How's it sound? I mean, what a
No, I mean, the guy, it's just, you vacillate. We've talked about it before, but one vacillates back and forth by like thinking, what a moron and how dangerous.
Yeah.
And, and so, you don't want to laugh at it too much because it's really dangerous. On the other hand, it's funny, right? The guy is, the guy's an idiot followed by idiots. I mean, look at Herschel Walker. Look at some of these clowns.
Yeah. Herschel Walker apparently came out today and was like, I don't want to debate Raphael Warnock because he's going to embarrass me.
Well, actually, I think what he said was, I'm not very smart.
Right.
Which was
even
the
worse.
most perceptive thing the guy has ever said, because he's not. But, This past Sunday, we had Trump doing or whatever it was, doing a rally in Ohio.
Yeah. Did you now when he does these rallies, Dave? Do you watch them to cover them? Do you watch excerpts? I'm torn.
I've watched some.
Yeah.
I watch as much as I can take. That one was spine chilling because they're like giving next best thing to Nazi salutes and playing QAnon songs, and he's spreading QAnon mythology as though it were gospel. And then he's saying, hey, when the Republicans take over, nobody's going to, I won't be sent to jail. Like, once we take over, I'll be above the law. And they're all, cheering.
I was listening to Alex Jones for the first time ever, maybe. I wanted to, every once in a while, take a deep dive. I think this is healthy to go down to hear what they're saying. And this guy, Steven Crowder, who I absolutely despise, this kid, mainly because he fashioned himself a stand-up comedian years ago. And all of us were like, we've never seen you at a comedy club. But he had Alex Jones on, and they're always warning about the Soros and influence and so on. They're always concerned about the Jews without necessarily saying it. But I'm just, I'm reading Luke Mogelson's new book, and I've interviewed so many experts. The real threat is this brand of Christian nationalism, fascism, whatever you want to call it. It was certainly animated in that play and present at that rally. And I don't know that I've talked to you specifically about that threat. Isn't it interesting, though, how the far right is always warning about Soros and the globalists when, in fact, the real danger, the real domestic threat here in America is this brand of super Christian nationalists?
Well, it's deplorable, obviously, to choose a word, but it's also not that surprising. This is the formula that fascists follow on a regular basis. They try to boil down nationalism to a few things, certain aspects of identity, white identity, Christian identity, national greatness. And then they describe everybody else who doesn't follow that sort of the profile as an enemy. And that brings their group together and enables them to go up. And Hitler did it. Mussolini did it. This is not new. It's and that was the thing that was so chilling about this rally, is that it stopped. Once upon a time, right-wing extremism in the United States still decided to present itself like normal politics and wrapped itself in, the kind of patriotism of admiring our institutions and Constitution and so on. And all that's fallen aside. These guys are fascists. They're white, Christian, nationalist fascists. And they want to put down women. They want to put down people of color. They want to put down Jews. They want to put down foreigners. You say put down, I would say even more specifically, take the rights of. Take the rights of, and that seems to be the first step typically in these things. Because, you take people's rights, you end up throwing them in jail, and Lord knows what happens. And, if you think, well, this is all consigned to the past, beyond what you're seeing here, look what Russia did when it went into Ukraine. It tried to destroy, Ukraine's national culture, its language. It's, tried to strip all that away and talk about a kind of Russian national ideal and say, you're truly Russian. And, it's profoundly scary because it's progressed so far. And, here we are talking about the, right-wing extremists doing Nazi salutes and regularly condemning the Jews. And the president, when they, 5 years ago said Jews will not replace us, saying there were some very good people in that crowd. Yeah. Speaking of regularly condemning the Jews, you wrote a piece for the Daily Beast at the beginning of the month. A new Iran nuclear deal would prove America is truly back. And I wanted to ask you because Leslie Stahl interviewed the Iranian president? Is that who it was last night on 60 Minutes? And she asked him if the Holocaust ever happened. Does Israel have the right to exist? And this week is the UN General Assembly. And so I kind of just wanted to talk about where the relationship is with Iran.
certainly the nuclear deal, and obviously the fact that this guy's still saying this garbage. And most importantly, I think I saw on your Twitter, and I also heard it mentioned on 60 Minutes, they just the Iranian police just detained a woman for not dressing appropriately, and apparently they tortured her and killed her. So it's a pretty primitive culture. Where are we vis-a-vis the Iran deal and their regime still being so medieval?
Well, I think each of those is they're related, but they're different. Iran is a primitive regime. It is an anti-Semitic regime. It is a regime that's trying to create nuclear weapons. It's a regime that puts down women and forces them into kind of medieval lifestyle, at least the way they appear in public. You're absolutely right that they have committed egregious human rights abuses in this regard. They seem to be on the verge of, they've had, one leader for the past 40 odd years. He seems to be in ill health. So that seems like there is going to be a transition at the top. I wouldn't expect, overnight enlightenment or even any enlightenment. There's a very hardcore group that's been running the country for decades, and I think they will continue to. They view, they've long said the Holocaust may not have happened, and they've long said they want to destroy Israel, and they long viewed the United States as an enemy. And, for all these reasons, I think we have to view them as a threat on many, many levels. Having said that, a nuclear deal, the reason that the Obama administration ultimately entered into it is, a horrible, repressive, medieval, anti-Semitic, anti-international law country with nuclear weapons is worse than one without nuclear weapons. And so if we could strike a deal that would stop them from the development of weapons, that would be a good thing, even if it was for a limited period of time. Trump came along, pulled the plug on that deal. Iran's nuclear program immediately sped up.
Yeah.
And the threat grew that this horrible country would soon be a horrible nuclear country. And, I think there has been some effort to restore the deal, and it has sort of faded in and out from, being likely, sort of like a distant radio signal. But it's been complicated by the fact that the Russians have been interlocutors. And obviously we have our issues with the Russians at the moment. And that people like the Israelis have, continuously been saying, don't do a deal, even though many Israeli leaders have said in retrospect that Trump pulling out of the deal was a big mistake. So, I personally, should we have a deal if we can strike a deal? Yes, we should, because we don't want nuclear Iran. Is Iran a threat? Should it be viewed as a threat? Should we pull together allies and see what we can do to contain that threat? Absolutely. It's a country that not only does not share values with us, which plenty don't, but it seeks to destabilize the community in the Middle East, and that could have big negative repercussions for us.
Dave, my understanding is that international agreements and treaties used to be kept when a new president would come in, but can you blame any country for not wanting to sign a deal with the United States of America, knowing that Mike Lindell might be the next president?
President Mike Lindell? Yeah, I don't think we're in great jeopardy of that. I worry, that the not so funny scenario comes, and that we end up with President Ron DeSantis.
Same point, though, meaning that the deals that are made by one president are broken by the next.
Yeah, no, that's a terrible thing, and nobody trusts us right now. And the Iranians are like, "How can we trust you if you do a new deal?" And
right.
And that's a big problem, because honestly, they can't. Because Ron DeSantis, with whoever his Mike Pompeo is, they'll go and undo a lot of the stuff that Biden did, whether it's climate accords or deals like the Iran deal. And gradually we will have no credibility, because people will not view us as a stable, trustworthy nation.
I just heard a rumor. I don't know if this is true, but Ron DeSantis, if elected, is thinking of having his Secretary of State be Fox News' Jesse Waters. What do you think of that? I just made that up.
Yeah, I see your dog lying in the background. More qualified by far.
She is definitely less temperamental. Let's talk about Russia. You've got two really great articles, lots to talk about at the Daily Beast. Most recently, Putin's going to be a bad loser after his defeat in Ukraine. And what happens to Russia after it loses, where the second piece there, I believe it was, you interviewed a whole bunch of experts, and almost everybody across the spectrum comes to similar conclusions about Russia and Putin. And it's a really fascinating piece. I learned a lot, but man, did Putin seemingly really screw up not only the future of Russia, their quote comeback to power, but his own legacy. I mean, I've been hearing serious people say Putin's done. They're going to get rid of him. I mean, I don't know if what you think about that, but you've been writing a lot about it. So share with me some of your thoughts on who you talked to and what you learned.
Well, the two separate articles, they're complementary. The first article, I did indeed talk to a bunch of experts. I think I quote 7 or 8 in the article from across the spectrum. And, all of them essentially conclude that, no matter what here happens in the final stages of this war, Putin has lost. He's lost the credibility of the country. He's cost what was once the world's second largest army, not only its reputation, but second most powerful army. Not only the massive reputational loss, but loss of equipment that's going to take years and years and years to replace. Loss of human beings. I think he may have deployed something like 250,000 people in this effort, and something like 70 to 80,000 have been killed or injured.
Insane number.
Insane number. Vastly, vastly more than, for example, in their 10-year-long war in Afghanistan. And so, that's damage. The country has suffered a lot of economic damage, and the sanctions are not going away anytime soon. Obviously, NATO is stronger and maybe larger. And then, you also have this compounded by the fact that the past few days he went to a summit in Uzbekistan called the Shanghai Summit, where a bunch of Asian countries got together, including India, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and notably China. And I think he sort of thought, well, here I am going off to friendly environment. And it wasn't friendly. The Indians publicly said, you can't violate international law like this, and called him out. And I, by the way, don't think the Indian prime minister is a particularly great guy and kind of anti-democratic, but he did that. But more notably, the Chinese, who Putin has been saying, hey, we're buddies, these are our right-hand people, or, we're their right-hand people. The Chinese essentially said, we're not going to make a public statement of support of you. The Chinese have not provided them with weapons. And Putin publicly had to say in his response to the Chinese, hey, we hear your concerns. The next day, he made a speech in front of this group, and he, said, we're going to go and defeat the Ukrainians. And then they panned around the table. And these are, again, the media, local media of his friendly nations. And people are practically rolling their eyes. And so, it's not just that he's lost NATO. It's not just that Ukraine's fighting back hard. But the few countries he thought were on his side, they're distancing themselves from him. And so, this is a loss for him at any level, regardless of how the war ends. The second article I did, and I'm sorry to go on, but the second article I did, I went and I sat down, had long conversations at the top of the U.S. government to very senior U.S. policymakers. And, one of them said to me specifically, one of the things we're most worried about is, how does Putin take the loss? Does he, it's not in his character to say, oh, I made a terrible mistake, guys, I'm really sorry.
Right.
How can I make it up to you? That's not the way Putin does this stuff. And so they're worried on everything from, just sort of randomly destroying Ukrainian cities to, doing horrible things to the people he's kidnapped out of Ukraine, to using a tactical nuclear weapon. Now, the U.S. government, one of the things they said to me was they've made it very clear to Russia that it would be a big mistake to use a tactical nuclear weapon, and that it will unleash, waves more pain on Russia. And so the U.S. is paying attention to that carefully. But this is the X factor right now. This war is going to go on for another year. Ukraine's going to make some substantial gains in the course of that time. But the question, and Russia is probably going to be pushed back and suffer some substantial defeats. The question is, does Putin say, well, I don't care, I'm going to fight this forever and ever and ever? Or I'll sign a peace treaty, but, I have never honored a treaty before, so, I'm then going to start firing missiles at Kyiv whenever I want. Who knows? This is the thing that's really troubling the West's intelligence community and policymakers.
I want to play something for you from 60 Minutes last night. It's about 45 seconds. This is Scott Pelley with President Biden, who he had a long, I guess they spent a couple days together. But here was just one of the big headlines that came out of that conversation.
What should Chinese President Xi know about your commitment to Taiwan?
We agree with what we signed on to a long time ago, and that there's a one China policy, that Taiwan makes their own judgments about their independence. We are not we're not encouraging their being independent. That's their decision.
But would U.S. forces defend the island?
Yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack.
After our interview, a White House official told us U.S. policy has not changed. Officially, the U.S. will not say whether American forces would defend Taiwan.
So there you go, Dave. Did the president step in shit by committing U.S. boots on the ground in Taiwan?
I don't think so. I see a lot of people talking about it, a lot of foreign policy types going, well, strategic ambiguity means this or strategic ambiguity means that. What was he supposed to say? No, we're not going to defend Taiwan. So then everybody would say, well, that's an open door to the Chinese. I don't know. Oh, well, then he's a doddering old president. He doesn't know what he's doing. I'm not going to tell you. The right response is to leave the Chinese concerned that invading Taiwan would be a terrible thing to do. And the best way to do that is for the president to say, look, I want to honor the one China policy, but I don't want China to invade Taiwan, and there'll be a cost for that. My guess is that if China started to invade Taiwan, squeeze the noose around Taiwan, you probably won't see the United States send in troops or launch into World War III with China. You'll probably see something like what you've seen in Ukraine, which is the United States will provide them with weapons. The United States will bring the international community together to also support them. The United States will use the international community to put economic pressure on the Chinese and so forth. And so, I think, the message you got from that is precisely the message he wanted to send the Chinese, which is don't do this.
Right. One more question I wanted to ask you about our southern border. Is it secure, Dave? What a stupid question. I hate that question. I ranted about that yesterday because, and I rarely rant these days, but when Chuck Todd asked the vice president that question a couple weeks ago, now everybody's been asking every other Democrat to answer for her answer. She said, yes, it's secure. But I mean, what is she speaking of, what is she supposed to say? I mean, if you ask the principal, is the school secure? They'd say it's as secure as we could possibly make it. I mean, given the border, it's as secure as you can make it. Billions and billions of dollars in security. But that gotcha question, I mean, it's possible someone could get across the border and do a bad thing. It's possible someone could get into school. It's possible somebody could break into the Rothkopfs, even though you have cameras and lasers, I'm sure. I don't like that question. Is the border secure? It's so minimizing, especially to a massive and important debate about immigration. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right about breaking into our house. As Marjorie Taylor Greene has pointed out, we Jews have space lasers.
That's right. You have your own dedicated space lasers.
We have our own dedicated space lasers, and so we're secure. Look, her answer is right. There are not, our border crossings are well policed. They use the best available technologies. They try to improve upon it on a regular basis. And we have a long, thousands and thousands of miles of border, ocean, land, deserts, all sorts of things that it's possible if somebody really wants to get into the country that they will get in. And so a secure border doesn't mean there is no illegal immigration. A secure border means there is as little illegal immigration as possible, right, and that those people who do come across illegally face, accountability for it because we police it well. And, frankly, compared to any other country in the world, we're doing just fine. Can we do better? Sure. But this is not, that's not what the question is. And when Chuck Todd asks a question like that, it reveals his willingness to sort of play for the other side.
Yeah.
It's not really about, are the borders secure? It's that there's a threat out there and you should be doing more. Right. And what is that threat, Chuck? Well, the threat is brown people who don't speak English. We don't want them in our country, and Democrats want them in our country. And that's just such bullshit.
Do want them in our country. According to every economist I read and talk to, we desperately need them in our country.
Right. And also the CEOs that you read and talk to, and frankly, immigration has been the great rejuvenating engine of American growth for 240 years. And your relatives and my relatives and the relatives of every single one of these critics, including the extreme nutcases like Stephen Miller, came to the United States as refugees, as immigrants, as people. We have the freaking. I live, as it happens, a block away from the house in which Emma Lazarus wrote the poem that's on the base of the Statue of Liberty.
Right.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. That's what we're about. That's why we're great. That's not what, that's not a threat. That's a promise.
It seemingly used to be. I feel like we hate poor people here, part of our culture.
Well, look, inequality in the United States is a serious problem. You're absolutely right about that.
But we blame them. That's the thing. Like we really, I'm sure a lot of nations and communities do. They should work harder, but we really do an expert job of scapegoating them and blaming them.
The right wing in America does. Yeah. The Democratic Party is saying you should have Social Security. The right wing is saying we're going to take the Social Security. Right. The Democratic Party is saying let's pay for some of your health care. The Republican Party right now, they're saying, no, we want to take that away from you. The Democratic Party is saying, hey, we want to help the poorest. We don't want to have child starvation when we have a crisis. We want to, get people to have jobs. The right wing is saying, no, we want to protect the returns of the rich for their stock market accounts, or their capital gains accounts. This is a battle where, you've got a tiny, tiny fraction of the top 1% controlling a political party to reduce their tax bills and cast everybody else, sort of at the mercy of fate.
All right, let's end on a lighthearted, happy note, which is that your daughter Joanna is a writer on the Smartest, Funniest Show on television, where I'm the fluffer. Joanna Rothkopf. I still haven't met her. I hope to. I think she avoids me, as do a lot of women and people. But they won the Emmy again. The show won the Emmy again this past week. And
can I give you some advice?
Please.
This is a phrase you want to get out of your vocabulary. Women and people. Don't ever say that phrase again.
I separate women from people.
Yeah. Don't do that.
You knew who I... Well, I realize
don't do that. Okay. I'm just giving you some advice.
I appreciate that. But just to be clear, I was elevating them.
Yeah, okay.
Over people, in case anybody questions.
Above people, that's fine.
Woman and people.
You're nice to mention it. My daughter is a senior writer on the John Oliver Show. You and I have talked about this in the past, off microphone, offline, because I know what you mean by fluffer. People who, watch Boogie Nights may not know what you mean by fluffer.
Right. That's fine. I don't care what they think. I don't care. I've got, you know how many fluffer awards I have? The warmies, the warm-up awards. They're next week in
they're big. They're
Toledo.
Very big awards. Well, I've gone and seen the John Oliver show, and I got to say, when you go in there and, you go in front of the crowd and you make them laugh, and everybody's ready to laugh some more when John comes out, it helps to make it a better show.
Yes, I'm very talented, and I appreciate the recognition. My question is, when your daughter wins an Emmy for writing on the smartest, funniest show on TV, what's that? Do you text her and say congrats? Because you learn just like the rest of us. You're watching TV, and what do you say when your daughter wins yet another award at a young age? She's like in her late 20s or something.
Yeah, but she's in her early 30s.
Oh,
I'll tell you, she's won 4 Emmy Awards.
Wow.
Amazing. I think she's very lucky to work for that show. I don't mean to sort of tell, private tales out of school, but I'll tell you what happened. The night of that award, because normally that's what I'll do. We'll send each other emails and stuff, and I'll send a very sort of dad-ish email saying, I don't take this for granted. This is special. But the night of the awards were announced was her sister's wedding. And she, some of us knew that this was going to happen. And so we're checking the email, and she went around to everybody and she said, this is Laura's wedding. And so I don't want it to come up. I want to focus on the wedding. And she gave a great toast and everything else. Very funny. And it was a great wedding, but I thought the best part of the award was the fact that she put it on the side and to focus on being a sister.
That's very thoughtful. Is it true she checked Twitter throughout her speech to her sister?
Fortunately, the award came beforehand. Otherwise, you don't know.
That is great. She sounds like a real class act, and congratulations to you for raising her. That's pretty awesome. That's very thoughtful.
I just have to say, and this is what any father would say in this case. I have 2 fabulous daughters, and the one who got married, who's a psychotherapist, is equally spectacular, and they are exactly equal in all things.
What awards has she won? Television awards. I think that really is the measure of a person. Sorry.
Well, that is a very fluffery perspective.
What's the answer, by the way? Real quick, what's your advice? I have 2 daughters. They're pretty great. Do you have any good advice for other dads out there raising girl dads?
I don't want to sound too pompous, but I'll tell you one thing. I was once called upon to give a speech at some company, and they flew me down in their little jet, and I went in front of them, and it was in the sort of deep South, and the values were a little, I felt like a stranger in a strange land. Anyway, at the end of the speech, they said, well, look, we ask everybody this one question. And I said, okay, go ahead. And they said, what is your philosophy of life? And I was like, really? That's what you're asking? It's like, here's a point blank question. What's your philosophy of life? And I know it's kind of, no, seriously, right? It's like Aristotle. It's like, I'm going to just, go in this cave and devote my whole... Anyway, so I was like, okay. And I said, my philosophy of life is one thing. Love your kids. If you love your kids and that informs everything you do, everything will be fine.
And if you have no kids?
Love somebody else. I don't know. Love somebody else's kid.
I love it.
The point is, you were saying about being a father.
Yep.
If you love your kids, it's a good guide. But also, if you love your kids, it probably will help you make a good decision about whether to recycle or not, too.
I think that's good advice, and I love that. I love it very much. Dave Rothkopf, what a sweet ending. I will take that advice and use it, and I appreciate whenever you join me. I always learn so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right, there he goes, Dave Rothkopf. Everybody go listen to Deep State Radio. Follow him on Twitter at DJ Rothkopf. And, of course, read him at The Daily Beast. Always so happy when he joins me. That was another great conversation. Now I want to share with you something from one of my favorite podcasts hosted by the great Dan Harris, 10% Happier, which is based on a book that he wrote. He's got a whole company now based on this idea, this concept, this brand. But I love listening to this podcast. I think this last year I've talked a lot about it. I've dropped nuggets, but it's been one of the most emotionally transformative years of my life, if not the. And one of the most positive resources along this journey has been this podcast. It's from Dan Harris. It's called 10% Happier. And specifically, the other day or a couple of weeks ago, he had these two guests on who wrote a book about communication, how to speak clearly, calmly, and without alienating people. The authors are Dan Klerman and Mudita Nisker, and this is not a paid thing or anything. I just wanted to share this. I know they advertise other places. I really just wanted to share this. And this lesson about reactive listening was one that I think is really profound. It clearly meant a lot to Dan Harris. It meant a lot to me. This is about a 5-minute clip, and I just thought I'd start sharing these kinds of things. I'm listening to them. I want to share them. I want to promote them. They make my life better. Maybe it'll make yours better as well, or at least 10% better or a little happier. Here it is. I think you'll like it. I hope you do right now.
So back to the skills. We've made several references to reflective listening. I want to get you guys to describe it, and then maybe we should even role play a little bit, because this, in my experience, is, this is the money. This is such an incredible skill. And as you know, I came to you after having had a 360 review, which was where people in my life were able to speak anonymously about my strengths and weaknesses, particularly my weaknesses. And one of the big weaknesses was, I could be pretty unskillful in my communication. And then I got another 360 review, and it was very different. You've read both of them. And one of the things that people talked about the most in the second, much more positive 360 review, which came 3 years later, one of the things people talked about the most was reflective listening. So with that introduction, would one of you describe this skill?
Yes, I'd love to. It's one of my favorite of the skills that we teach, actually. And I agree with your assessment of the impact of it. Reflective listening is simple and radical. It's radical because the only goal you have when you're using reflective listening is to try to understand what the other person is saying in the way they would like to be understood. So you're not psychoanalyzing them or interpreting them. You're just trying to understand them in the way they want to be understood. And you're feeding back to them what your understanding is, and you're doing that in your own words. You're paraphrasing. You're not parroting. You're not saying what they said. You're not using their words. Using their words can be helpful at times, but I think in a lot of ways it shows that the person who's doing that has a good memory and can memorize what you said and feed it back. It doesn't necessarily mean that the listener has taken in the message in order to repeat back verbatim. But when you translate what you're understanding into your own language, you have to really be taking in what they're saying. And for the speaker to hear their message in your words, oftentimes it's very helpful. It's very clarifying. And within the process of reflective listening, the speaker gets to correct or add on whenever they want. They're in the driver's seat. And you follow that speaker with your reflective listening and acknowledging corrections.
So in reflective listening, I repeat back to the person in my own words what I've understood from what they've said.
Correct. And your agreeing or disagreeing with them is irrelevant. At that moment when you're listening, it doesn't matter if you agree or disagree or have opinions or have good advice. None of those things matter, because in reflective listening, you're like a mirror. You're reflecting back. You don't even exist in a certain way.
This is not to say that you won't have opinions.
Exactly.
or
Good
reactions.
Point. Good point.
You very well might. You put those on the back burner when you're reflecting. When it's your turn to talk and the person indicates that either verbally or non-verbally, of course, you do want to share your views with the person, especially if you have a different view. Sometimes people equate reflective listening with agreement. It isn't agreement, although it's easy to think that the person who's reflecting is agreeing with you since they're reflecting accurately what you're saying. That's when, after reflectively listening, it's important to come in if you have a different view and talk about it.
But back to the brain science, what you're doing, especially in contentious discussions, by reflecting before you send your own message is really giving a massage to the other person's amygdala of, okay, it's all good. You're being understood. You're being heard. And once we get that visceral and often subconscious, because sometimes we don't even recognize we're being reflected. Once we get that satisfaction, we're much better able to listen to what somebody else has to say.
Yes, we recommend reflecting someone who's distraught so that they can calm down and they can receive your message. It can help them and it can help you.
It helps them organize their own experience, their thoughts and feelings being reflected as they get to notice what they are through your reflections. And that has a very soothing effect for many people.
The challenge is that it's difficult for people to hold back on their own messages, their own agreements and disagreements and opinions in order to really do a good job reflectively listening. Again, it takes some restraint to wait till it's timely for you to express yourself.
Well, there's just a clip. How about it? I'm back. Dan Klerman, Mudita Nisker, 10% Happier. Dan Harris is the host. I think you should check that out. Maybe I'll get them on the show. The book is Let's Talk, An Essential Guide to Skillful Communication. I know this sounds like I'm doing an ad, but this really has meant a lot to me, the podcast. And I just listened to this episode and thought it really was impactful. So I hope you appreciated that. Go listen to the whole episode on wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, and I got to get Dan on. I got to get Dan Harris on. That's all I've got for you on today's show. Wajad Ali joins me tomorrow and more. So thank you very much for tuning in today. Join our street team. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/standupwithpete to go see clips of my interviews, video clips. You can also listen to the whole show on YouTube if you want. And please subscribe with a paid subscription if you haven't already. Go to standupwithpete.com. Standupwithpete.com. I love you. I'll talk to you tomorrow. John Carroll, take us out.
I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.